Second speaker is Professor Fozia Qazi. She's a professor at Islamic University of Science and Technology and heads the Department of Mathematics there. She holds a PhD in mathematics from the Syracuse University in New York State and has worked as an academic in the US for many years before she returned to Kashmir in 2009. She has written and lectured widely on mathematics and on gender issues and Kashmir. Her research uses, fascinatingly, the mathematics of symmetry analysis on the shawl, the lattice, and other traditional patterns of Kashmir to understand cultural order and interactions in the region. She's also a founding member of Child Nurture and Relief, CHINAR, an NGO that has been helping economically and socially disadvantaged children in Kashmir for the last decade. She's also an artist and a photographer and often brings mathematical elements to her art, and her work has also been exhibited at several places in the United States. Delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Natasha. Delighted to be here, but not as a mathematician, as a Kashmiri. And I'm also giving a presentation as a PowerPoint, a slideshow, but basically to give you an idea of what it is like to be a Kashmiri living in Kashmir and in the context that we're living and the circumstances. And we are living in spite of everything. So the title, for those of you who don't understand Kashmiri, the word kosher has two meanings. It means the Kashmiri language, but it also means the Kashmiri person. And it is the second meaning that I am using here. The images that you're going to see here are basically images of daily life, sort of ordinary activities, but within, and literally within, a military context. And this idea evolved, I have to sort of say this in the acknowledgement section. The idea of framing these images in that context evolved out of a discussion I had with a couple of friends and former colleagues, Shannon O'Reilly and Jeremy Vaughan. And this was an exhibition that was held in 2007 of some of my photographs, and the idea evolved out of it. But what you'll see here is are not necessarily all of those original images, but a continuation of that idea. And I also want to acknowledge Kashmiri photojournalist Javed Shah. I've used, and with his permission, 5 images for the frames. These are the black and white. They were manipulated a little bit, you'll see in a minute. Those are for the frames, and I just want to thank him, and he knows I'm here today. This was the artist's statement that I had used in the first exhibition. It explains and gives a context to this slideshow. So let me read it out to those of you who are craning your necks right now. There is a veil of control that renders the kosher invisible. Oppressive control that operates through several layers of political and military power and aims to make us irrelevant. It distorts reality and stifles expression. It tries to recast us into something we're not. As it cloaks us in its darkness, this veil seeks to erase the vivid colors of our dreams and render them a uniform gray. I take these images to remove this veil and reveal the kosher that I know. These images are meant to give a larger context to simple acts: a conversation, a smile, a prayer, a celebration, or a chore. Each act completely normal and ordinary. Yet, given the backdrop of violence and oppression, these simple acts take on a larger meaning. They reveal our humanity that cannot be shrouded. I don't make images, I take them. I take them back from the controlling powers so that I can erase the gray top coat and reveal the vibrant colors underneath. I take them with me as reminders of our kindness and resilience. And I take them places so that you may know the kosher. And as I said, that is the idea, that you understand what it is like, at least visually, what it is like to live where we are living and in the circumstances that we are living. So let me begin. I had to bring in math somewhere. Disturbed area. You must have heard this term being used in the context of Kashmir. And I must apologize. I'm at an age where I have to use something for reading, and I continue to deny that fact sometimes. Kashmir is often referred to as a disturbed area. And what does that mean? That means governments are more concerned with restoring order. That means when tourists come or are planning to visit and admire our geography, they want to first ensure that we're orderly. But what does disturbed area mean to us? On a lighter note, the image that you see here was actually an area problem in mathematics. The teacher was discussing how to calculate areas. But what does disturbed area mean? This image was taken in Gurez, and the school was literally a stone's throw away from the line of control. This is the line that divides the two sides of Kashmir. And as I was approaching Dawar, which is the main town there, you could see the guns trained in one direction, and you knew exactly where the line of control was because the other side was there, so the guns were pointing towards that. So this is an area that is disturbed into fragments, and that's what disturbed area is to us. Inheritance. This is a child and her great-grandmother. You can see they're engaged in a very private, very intimate conversation. In contrast to that, you see the soldiers very much aware of the camera and looking at you and looking at the camera. Uncertainty rules our days and nights, aided and abetted as it is by the military gaze. But we carve a moment out of it for ourselves, a moment where we can pass on memories, where we can pass on history, our traditions. And we do this in the strongest and surest possible way, which is the word of mouth. And it is how we preserve our past and build our future. Childhood is freedom. This is a translation of a Kashmiri proverb, Lakchar go mokjar. And this is the title I've used for this particular slide. When we talk about sort of passing on an inheritance to our children, it's often in the form of bricks and mortar, your house. It can be your values and your beliefs. And it can be sort of a future that you're leaving for your children. But in our case, we also pass on that sense of uncertainty, a taste of siege within which we're living. But the irony of it all, or perhaps the positive of it all, is that our children also pass on something to us, and that is a sense of free abandon, which is what we have inherited from our children. And this is what Lakchar is, Lakchar go Makchar, childhood is freedom. That's what it's all about. And they do this in spite of the boots on ground conditions that we live in. Lines of control. You heard this term, line of control, several times today. If you look at the two photographs, the black and white frame image is actually from something called an identification parade, which has happened in Kashmir on a fairly regular basis. You're lined up, usually men are lined up, and they have to produce their identity cards, and they're questioned as to where they're going, who they are, and all sorts of questions. So here you see two lines. When we're controlled by lines, we're divided by lines. This is external oppressive control. When you stand in a line, in a queue, in an identification parade, that's oppressive control. When you're divided from your family, that is oppressive control. But there's also an internal, more voluntary control. You stand up in line voluntarily during an act of prayer. And there's a big difference between the two forms of lines. And there is a control that we want, which is the control, which is basically to control our own destiny. That is what this is all about. Rebel with cause. We have often been termed as insular, unable to look beyond. And this is a stereotype that has been used for us. But here you see a man who is wearing something that is very Kashmiri. These are the distinguishing features of Kashmiri outfit. The firan as well as the cap, the sozni cap. And at the same time, he's quite comfortable riding a motorcycle. And this is the antithesis of the stereotype of being insular. This tells us that we are very comfortable in our own skin, but at the same time ready to embrace a new world. You've heard the term integral part before. This is a play on that. Kashmir is referred to as an integral part by the Indian state. We are a bone of contention. We have been subjected to wars of possession, territorial dispute, as we heard earlier. But we are more, much more than that. We're integral partners, free to understand the world in our own language. The image that you see here, this couple, they're bakers. And they had been married for over 30 years. And when I went to their bakery to take some photographs, they asked me to take a picture of the two of them. And they said, we have never had a photograph taken of the two of us as a couple. And this is a couple that had been married for, as I said, more than 30 years. So I took a picture, and the next day I gave them a copy. But this is an example of a happy partnership. A promise. We refuse to be cowed down by the gun. We conduct our weddings with gusto. And if you have ever attended a Kashmiri wedding, gusto it is. You will know. The promise of weddings, celebration, and continuity, despite all. Broken cup, mentored man. This is a translation of a Ladakhi proverb that I once heard from a former colleague. If you look at the two photographs, the potter, his name is Muhammad Rajab, he's a picture of concentration. He's focused on shaping a beautiful pot. But the frame image is that of man being beaten and kicked by security forces. There's chaos in the frame, and there is complete focus and concentration on Muhammad Rajab's face. The potter makes a cup, shapes a pot, but it's fragile, and it breaks, and then he makes another one. It is the adversity that has mentored us. We have seen an example of it in Parveena ji, how the adversity that she faced transformed her into a very strong woman, amazingly strong woman. And one of the other things that has happened is this adversity has educated our youth politically. And I think they're probably the most, we were just talking about it, politically educated youth in South Asia. Fireworks. In a sense, we have responded to fire with fire, the fire of our resistance. We celebrate this kind of fire. We're forged in it, ready for freedom. Collective conscience. And again, you've heard this phrase before. When Afzal Guru was hanged in last February, the Supreme Court ruling said that, I quote, to satisfy, this was, I quote, to satisfy the collective conscience of the nation, end quote. In the summer of 2008, our collective conscience poured out on the streets of Kashmir demanding azadi. And this is a collage of photographs I took that summer when all manner of vehicles were passing by a window, and you can see even the window in the center. They were passing by on their way to a rally, and this was the Pampur Chalo rally. And you could see them in buses, in trucks, on motorcycles, all manner of vehicles, carrying black flags and shouting slogans. And in the window next to me was a young girl. She was barely probably 8 or 9 years old. And she was waving a black flag, cheering the rally goers on as the vehicles passed by the window. And on one occasion, she was greeted by this very loud yell of "Jio Mere Lal," which translates to roughly to "live my sweet." And this was by a young man who was on a motorcycle. He was riding pillion on the motorcycle, carrying an enormous black flag. And when he saw this little girl, he waved back and then said, "Jio Mere Lal." And I will never forget the look on that young girl's face, the delight on her face as she understood that there was a sort of someone else had responded to what she was doing. Sort of the endorsement of that shared sentiment that they had. And finally, our point of view. From our point of view, it is difficult to tell the future, what it looks like. Yet, we continue to look, to cultivate perspectives, and to define. And as the dispute lingers, the definitions crystallize to tell us exactly what we mean by azadi. Thank you.